this is on local heritage mapping. And again, I'd like to walk you through how this has really evolved into first as an interest, and then it became a discipline. And now it was able to elevate itself into a national advocacy. It has become a national methodology, which is quite commendable because it really becomes a springboard for all of your other uh, possible projects in any other disciplines. No, so when you talk of local heritage mapping, I think it's important to think of three things. The first one is the concept of heritage. This is concept one. The heritage pyramid, if you look at it, it's a three-sided pyramid. It just explains to us that when you do your mapping, you will always conveniently, in terms of taxonomy, in terms of classification, local heritage has two. It's either natural or cultural. The moment man enters into the picture of nature, ecology, environment, pag nakialam po siya sa environment, kalikasan, lahat po ng kanyang mapuproduce ay culture. Nature in itself is intact. It's the biggest sphere that we have here in the world. But the moment man enters into that world, he's able to do some creative things, he's able to express his talent, he's able to build something, then that becomes culture. One basic characteristic of this three-sided pyramid is the fact that the base is nature. Sabi nga ng COP21, ng ating conservation of the environment against climate change, man cannot exist without nature, but nature can exist without man. So you can just imagine parang man is just an output, no, of the whole total ecosystem systemic processes. Now, another characteristic of this pyramid is that it's three-sided. So when it's three-sided, you have culture divided either as intangible and tangible, and again, tangible is divided as movable and movable. Now, when you look at this, you'll notice that all sides are connected to each other. The base is connected to nature, and the two other sides are always connected to the two other classifications. What does this mean? It means this is a very holistic and interconnected framework. You cannot dislodge and you cannot discuss one classification without discussing the other classifications. The third characteristic is the fact that there is this meeting point of culture and nature. Sometimes there is that phenomenon we call the cultural landscape. The moment man interacts with the environment and the environment interacts with man in perpetuity, no? Any time of the year, any time in the future, it will still and will continue to evolve into interaction with man and the environment. And this becomes the concept of a cultural landscape. Or in the urban context, this becomes an urban landscape. So ito po yung first understanding na dapat isipin natin when we talk of cultural mapping. The second one, this is the heritage dynamics. Now, this diagram shows to you, sir, bakit ba may konsepto tayo ng conservation? Well, simply put, when you have this heritage dynamics, you have to look at heritage as something that's evolving. So you have the past. When you talk of heritage in the past, that's memory. When you talk of heritage in the present, it's identity. And definitely this identity you'd like to carry on. You'd like to ensure that this will endure up to the future. This is continuity. It is transmitted. And it's transmitted in so many different modes. So pwede po siyang through tradition, through education, through legislation, even through tourism. Now, there are positive and negative points of attributes of heritage that when you have a heritage that is memorable, that you have nostalgia, this is a very positive value. If it's meaningful, pag heritage po very meaningful, you'd like to bring it to the future, up to your next generation, you will interpret it, no? So when you look at these interpretations, particularly for built heritage, in yung mga buildings, what do you do to interpret your building, to maintain the building, to ensure that it will be enjoyed by other people, not just in the immediate future, but up to the next generation? Well, these are actions that you do, your preservation, restoration, reconstruction, redevelopment, innovation. So this becomes a little technical. So mga arkitekto siguro, this helps a lot. Now for the others, Some heritages are quite negative, no? You just sweep it down under the rug. So sometimes hindi mo na inaalagaan yung mga lumang bahay, pinag-aawayan ng mga lumang bahay. So it reaches to the point of it's not meaningful anymore, it's meaningless, it becomes obsolete. So marami po tayong dito sa Manila na ganyan ang nangyayari that many of the homeowners really neglect all of these important heritage buildings. So there's negligence, there's defacement, deformation, dysfunction, and contextual and demolition. Now, this is for built heritage. There's another diagram for intangible heritage. But maybe just to give you an idea that it is moving, no, in a spectrum. So please disabuse yourselves that dapat heritage, dapat naka-museum. Hindi po. Heritage is just like culture, kung saan nanggagaling ang heritage, it is very organic. It evolves. The other one is your concept of values, no, and your concept of self. When you do your mapping, you'll notice that many of the expressions, the practices, the knowledge systems really evolve out of the Filipino values. I think the NCCA also embarked on a value study for tourism. They also took on in 2012 this national consultation on tourism values. So different references. So may mythological, archaeological, and philosophical references. Now, lumalabas dito ang elements or attributes of a typical Filipino like makadiyos, makatao, makakalikasan, makabayan, masayahin, mabayanihan. And I think this was highlighted by our governor, no, yung lagi may pag-asa, our character to be so resilient, no, in many of the calamities and disasters and hazards. So when you do your mapping, you'll notice na lumalabas yung pagkamakadiyos ng mga Pilipino. Yung pagkamakalikasan natin lumalabas. Even our resilience, yung pagkamasayahin, may pag-asa, all of these aptitudes and quotients, this will be surfaced during your heritage mapping. Heritage mapping was a technique. Up to now, it's a technique, it's a methodology, it's a tool, no? Wherein you are able to identify and document cultural heritage resources of a specific space. It's a locality. You have to define first, ano ba yung locality na i-investigate niyo, and out of this, you must be able to not just inventory or identify. You need really to capture the stories behind each of these icons. And on their own, when you have a data, as one, sometimes hindi siya makakapag-generate ng very meaningful story. But if you look at this data in the context of the other data that you'll be able to generate, maganda po ang lumalabas sa mga narratives nito. Where do you use mapping? It can be for conservation, it can be for development. And these are the basic characterizations or the objectives when we do mapping. Very often, to identify the resource of the community, to understand and record these heritage resources, and maybe allow these resources to be used, even by non-users. And of course, you have to reach that level na hopefully, just hopefully, when you generate the database, volumes and volumes and volumes of data po yan. In fact, ma-overwhelm kayo sa dami ng data. We'll just hope that not only the mayors will be able to protect this and to codify this, no, into a legislation, but at the same time, sana province-wide, pan-Bohol, I think you have to accept that these are your selected, the superlatives of your particular heritage ecosystem. The heritage mapping was a particular topic in one of our courses in UST when we started the Diploma in Cultural Heritage Studies. This was around 2000. Meron dyan sa HS 502. So I used to teach this, cultural heritage management, and students were initially open to heritage mapping by mapping out yung mga pong mga nagtitinda ng mga bola-bola, tsaka kwek-kwek, tsaka mga isaw doon sa likod ng UST. Yun pa yung minamap out ng aming mga estudyante. Well, eventually, they moved up to a more anthropological context. So we do some early mapping exercises. This was a coastal barangay in San Juan, Batangas. This was Barangay Tubugan. And they had to map out a 1 kilometer stretch of mangrove site. And eventually, yung output po na na-publish naman, and this was turned over to the barangay captain of that San Juan municipality. The mapping project, I wrote it in this publication, yung sa aking pamanaraan. Remember, these are tools and methodologies that would help you really. Hello, Ma'am Rosalina. Ma'am Rosalina, naka-open po yung mic mo, Ma'am Rosalina. Natin ni Ma'am Rosalina Sentinales. So, moving on. So, this was published in this book on the last chapter in 2008. Ay, bukas na bukas yung buong DepEd. In a bigger scale, the whole mapping effort of the ASEAN and Australia was published here, no, in this book. And I think this is a very good reference for some of you. And I think if you would like to get a copy of this book, you just have to write yung COCI, ASEAN OCI in Jakarta. They are giving this book for free. This will be a good reference. By 2009, I remember we were talking about heritage mapping pa in Zamboanga and Marvin. These were early years of NCCAPC. They already offered under cultural education 206 the local cultural mapping. So this was really to introduce this technique to our public school teachers who were gearing up for a diploma, no, in cultural education. And eventually, when the Republic Act 0066 was promulgated in 2009, they already and explicitly stated that local government units through the cultural officers should maintain an inventory of cultural property under their jurisdiction. So this implicitly mandates all local government units to undertake a mapping project. Now, this was the foundation, no, of what we call now the Philippine Registry of Cultural Property, ang talaan ng mga ari-ariang kultural ng Pilipinas. So that's why through the LGU, in close coordination with NCCA, there is a directive for all our LGUs, all 1,650 LGUs, really to submit to NCCA this inventory. This was further fortified in 2018, no, through the SLG's Good Governance. And here it stated clearly under tourism, culture, and the arts, look at 7.2 letter C, that part of the SGLG is a cultural property inventory. Now, this is also a big advancement. This is a big step forward in terms of institutionalizing this technique we call cultural heritage mapping. 2019, I think this is a welcome publication that was well disseminated. At the same time, this is downloadable, no, in our internet, in the website of NCCA, this guide to participatory cultural mapping of local communities. So I hope all of our mappers could find time really to look at this in the web. For university, we're also putting cultural heritage mapping in a context of development. So it is not just really to inventory all of these icons, all of this information, but we have to inventory for a particular purpose. So the upper set of boxes is the general concept of development, wherein you identify resources, land, labor, capital, technology, entrepreneur, and eventually all of these factors of production should generate, no, more values through policies. At the same time, strategically should be planned out for them to develop or provide peso, dollars, or euros, no? And sa lower part po, the last row, this is our approach as conservation workers. We also look at our resources, but at the same time, we have to make sure that we use these resources in terms of conserving for the benefit of the people. Now, if you merge the two framework, yung middle ground, ito na po yung sinasabi nating Heritage and Development Framework wherein we do cultural heritage mapping activity, and this should be harnessed for the use of the community You have to provide them with new capacities. You have to give them all the information, and they should be able to protect this information. Eventually, the highest level of conservation would be for these heritages to be utilized. So ang heritage utilization could be education, you can use that. You can use that for investment, you can use it for tourism, you can use it for infrastructure. There are many iterations and permutations out of this information. So when you do mapping, basic po yan, awareness is being built. Then appreciation when you move to the next level, and this is intensified, protection is provided, and eventually you utilize. Now, you cannot utilize something that you do not protect. You cannot protect something that you do not appreciate, and you cannot appreciate something that you are not aware of. Ito po step ladder na to is just really common sense. No? Maybe the difficulty for some of our municipalities and even for some of our teachers is the fact that asan ang data? Nasaan ang data? Now, we have to accept the fact that very often walang data. There's no codified database. So you have to generate your own data. And this is your opportunity to put together your database. Now, if you look at the Cultural Heritage Mapping Toolkit of NCCA, this is one of the early pages. No, they're able to diagram what's the constellation of nature and what's the constellation of culture. And if you're going to transport this and translate all of this data and use it in your curriculum development, very often po hindi immediate na translate. You should have a curriculum guide, because out of all these mapped out heritage elements, you go through the 3 stages, so grades 1 to 6, 7 to 10, 11 to 12, even ALS, no? And this has to be calibrated according to DepEd's MELCs, no? So yung most essential learning competencies. Now, all of these should jive very well so that maximize natin, pag-generate natin ng data. You will have thousands of this. At the same time, you must be able to really decide which icons will be best for to deliver which particular competencies of the different grades level. No? So, kung gagawa kayo ng matrix nito, you can just imagine the voluminous work that you have to work through. I'm not sure how DepEd is working this out, but on our side, when we do this framework for some of our divisions, it is really very Herculean task, malaking challenge. And it's always a team, really a battery of good writers and a battery of people who understand exactly the needs of our DepEd. This is the framework of creative industry. This is the framework of the Design Center of the Philippines, UNCTA, the British Council, and even the Department of Trade and Industry. Now, if you look at this framework, tignan nyo, ang kanilang source ng lahat ng kanilang creative and functional creations are still heritage. It's the sites, it's the expressions. And from the sites and expressions, they move on to the arts, and this becomes very contemporary. This will now be transmitted through media, and eventually they will create something, maybe a design, maybe an architectural expression, maybe a new media. So this is the framework that we do with regards to the Department of Trade and Industry. Now for tourism, this is the framework, or they are also taking off from heritage mapping. Dito po makikita, ito ang format ng Department of Tourism, wherein they do first site assessment, site identification, product conceptualization, product development, then they do community consultations, and then eventually the beta testing, fine-tuning until they move on to marketing and promotions. So this is a basic formulation of how heritage data are being utilized and being elevated into another form or another mode. Now, we realize that, if you just do mapping and mapping and mapping, you'll definitely generate some data. But very often, if you're going to utilize the data, ito po yung magiging problem. Ang daming tapon. It's not all the data that you utilize in some level of activity, no? So what we did is actually binaliktad po namin ang format, and this is what we call now the strategic heritage mapping, wherein we have to ask first the vision and the mission of many of our local governments, whether it's for land use or the church vicinity, and we ask them what particular project you would like to embark. We are working with the Department of Education here, it's the DepEd sector. So if you are going to do curriculum development, what particular areas, no, based on your MELCs, will be needed? So dapat ma-identify na yun. And from there, you must be able to thresh out. So these are the databases that we have to generate. And these are the databases that definitely all of you will be utilizing. No? Kasi if you're going to capture the whole universe, that's impossible. If you're going to capture a constellation, it's still impossible. But if you define yung locus and focus and focus and locus nyo, I think that's very manageable. Now, 2013, this was quite memorable kasi ito po yung first conference on cultural heritage mapping. So, ang nangyari po dito, 2013, I think Sir Gardy was a guest here. He was really lamenting the fact na lumindol po ang Bohol noong October. November po, cultural heritage mapping. So, umiiyak po si Sir Gardy. By November or December, nandito rin po yung mayor ng Giwan. By late November or December, dumaan si Yolanda. So this was the conference that straddled two major disasters of 2013. And that's when they realized yung value na dapat may database. Kung meron po kasing database, you'll be able to reconstruct many of the values of the community. Vegan did cultural mapping early on, and they were able to produce, wow, so many books, so many museums, mga curricula nila as early as 2006. Many of their heritage icons and heritage resources were already integrated in their grade levels. So they even put up their own test the courses out of their data. So it's continuing. They have already updated their heritage maps. So every 10 years, they try to review the heritage maps and try to develop new expressions and new projects out of this updated map. This is one of the earliest province-wide mapping. In 2003, this was Ilocos Norte under Bongbong Marcos. So he mandated all the public school teachers and he put together the curriculum. Ang amazing po dito, they were able to put up a breathtaking museum, and now they're into export of all the revived industries. This is Inabel. Through Balay ni Atong, they were able to revolutionize new data, new colors, new patterns for their Inabel. And it's now one of the most coveted textile of choice, for many of the accessories and the luxury items, being exported by the Philippines. Now, Calatagan, Batangas also did a mapping project, and what was quite interesting in Calatagan is the fact that the teachers were able to discover many of their old structures, even this old fortification that was very significant with the galleon trade. Bataan also did a province-wide mapping. This was sponsored by the governor. All 11 municipalities had around 20 teachers. So even the foundation day of the whole province was changed because they were able to finally settle the issues regarding the dates and the histories of the foundation of Bataan. Tugaya, Lanao del Sur, dito po makikita nyo that this is quite difficult, particularly if they realize that the data, the information is quite valuable. Tugaya is one remote town in Lanao del Sur where they were able to produce all the breathtaking crafts that you see all over Mindanao. And the artisans, the craftsmen, they're all breathtaking. Unfortunately, because of the power of information, people felt malaking pera ang lumalabas dito. So the mayor who sponsored this was assassinated in the 2010 election because people were trying to wrestle the money and the information related to cultural mapping. G1 was mapped out a year before Yolanda came. So these were all the public school teachers. They mapped out the cemeteries, they mapped out the church. And when Yolanda ravaged the whole town in eastern Samar, they were confident that they will able to rebuild. They will be able to rebuild the whole town. Even the church now is finished, and they borrowed some information from the heritage maps of the mappers. Angeles City, they're able to map out not just 95 cc. Sa dami naman ang kinakain nilang baboy dyan, hindi mo maintindihan, no, kung gaano kataas ang incidence nila dyan sa atake de corazon. But they were able to revive, look at this, beautiful lanterns, all white. Ito po ang counterpart ng giant colorful lanterns in San Fernando. In Angeles, they have the lubenas, and this comes out every simbang gabi, no? Itong mga lanterns na to. So they were able to revive this lost tradition of the lubenas. Ilocos Sur is breathtaking, but they were not able to finish their mapping project because napakahirap because of the terrain. But they were able to publish all the traditional arts and crafts with due respect to the masters. Many of the masters here have become Gamaba awardees, no, of NCCA. Puerto Princesa City, they were able to map out for the underground river the important structures of the Tabanwas. So it's quite interesting because of the high respect that you have to give to these indigenous peoples, no? How they were able to work very well with nature and how they were able to respect and have that idea. They already accept change. They know how to adjust themselves very well to the change of the environment and the way they would adjust their houses also to changes. The same with the rice terraces or field cordilleras when we mapped out the different structures para makarecommend ng mestizo structure, no? Na hindi naman ganun ka-obtrusive or hindi naman ganun kasakit sa mata sa rice terraces. Quezon City did the mapping also, and they were able to produce itong Quezon City experience. It's the Quezon City Museum, the City Museum, right in the middle of the Quezon Memorial Circle. Ormoc was quite massive for a city. They were able to mobilize the same number with you, almost 400 teachers, and ito po ay they were able to produce, wow, endless volumes of information. Now, these are the information that the city is trying ang kanilang heritages to develop and really heighten their utilization of their indigenous cultures. Baguio, this is a diocesan mapping project, the first one. So parish pastoral councils, they had to document the properties and the practices and the histories of their local churches. Spark Summer is quite recent, but this is very, very massive. So again, sponsored by the congressman, and ito po ay, they were able to generate now, they're about to finish all curriculum guide for all grade levels up to alternative learning systems. Tourism of Calbiga, this was mapped out for purposes of peace security because ang dami po mga nice people around dyan sa lugar na yan. Now, I'd like to show you this very short video of how we're able to work with indigenous peoples. At the Mega Trade Hall on the 25th up to the 28th of October 2018 for our National Arts and Crafts Fair. This kind of activity, you'll notice that even from the most basic forms design, when you do the mapping, you'll be able to understand how you're going to interpret it into a more modern take. But you have to one, Baler, Ifugao, Quezon City, San Julian, Samar, Giwan, Buwak, Romblon, Angeles, Pampanga, Jimenez, Underground River, San Nicolas, Ilocos, Bataan, Colillo, Calatagan, Ormoc City, Marikina, Calatagan, Jensan, Malay, Ormoc, Tacloban, Magalang, Malay-Balay. So here you have, well, quite a number of mapping projects already. Pero always consider, hindi naman po lahat yan nagiging successful. No? Marami po dyan nalalaglag. One, because of changes in the politics. Number two, maybe hindi na ma-pick up. Nag-change na rin ang public school teachers, nag-change na rin ang mga ang community, nag-change na rin ang environment, nagkaroon ng there are many factors, no? So I'm sure Bohol, with all the wholehearted support of so many agencies, you'll be able to push through with it. Most of these mapping projects that we work with, ito po ay mga sariling sikap. So on their own, no, and we really handhold and ensure that they'll be able to transpose it to very high levels of values na makakatulong sa kanilang development. Expressing some thoughts about heritage mapping, no? There are formats that are quite framed, very strict ang format. This is very useful for analytics. But sometimes if you realize when you go around the community, ang gusto ng Pinoy talaga magkwentuhan. Pag nagkwentuhan ng Pinoy, ang daming makuha data talaga. The moment you become unframed or thematic, the meaning really comes out, it surfaces. Basics in mapping, of course, is identification, location, description, condition, connectivity, vulnerability, viability. So, it's not all fields. Hindi lahat po ng boxes ng mapping template ay mapupuno nyo, no? But try to come up with a meaningful interpretation, no, kung paano siya nababasa, and try also to do a journal. Ano na-experience nyo habang ginagawa niya yung mapping. Now, when you look at the mapping stage, heritage and development, stage 1 is cultural mapping, stage 2 is capacity building, stage 3 is policy making, stage 4 is value adding, stage 5 is community adapting. In closing, I'd like to share this to all of you. In local heritage